Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I am Laura McLemore, LSUS archivist, and joining me is Leah Widmeyer, Assistant Curator of Northwest Louisiana Archives. Our presentation is Respectable Means for Unrespectable Ends, Freedom Buses North to Operation Lone Star. Louisiana was a base, for reverse freedom rides in the 1960s. In honor of our 50th anniversary year, Northwest Louisiana Archives presents the first episode in a series we call Shreveport Déjà News, by examining Shreveport's role in the Reverse Freedom Rides project of Louisiana Citizens Councils 1961 to 1963, comparing its Freedom Bus North program with the busing of immigrants by Texas and Florida today.
On the morning of Friday, February 8th, 1963, 34-year-old Shreveport resident Alan Gilmore, his wife, 8 children aged 8 months to 10 years, boarded a Continental Trailways bus in downtown Shreveport with $75 in pocket money and a dozen cans of sardines, all their earthly belongings packed in a footlocker, 2 cardboard boxes, and a laundry bag. They were headed for Trenton, New Jersey. Gilmore had worked as a maintenance man and taxi driver in Shreveport. All he wanted to do was find a job to support his family. The Louisiana Citizens Council told him repeatedly that he would not find one in the South and to go north. Finally, Gilmore felt he had no choice. The Citizens Council promised that a job would be waiting for him. History tells us that these men had ulterior motives. Trenton, New Jersey was not picked at random. The family was headed to the home of U.S. Attorney General Nicholas Katchenbach, who was Deputy Attorney General in 1962 when the University of Mississippi admitted its first African-American student, James Meredith. In the eyes of segregationists, he was one of the parties to blame for integration of the university. The Gilmore family was being used as a message.
The Citizens Councils were an associated network of white supremacist, segregationist organizations, mostly, though not exclusively, in the southern United States. Organized primarily to oppose racial integration of public schools as a result of the U.S. Supreme Court's landmark Brown v. Board of Education ruling. The first council was formed on July 11, 1954 in Mississippi. The name was changed to Citizens Councils of America in 1956 and grew to about 60,000 members across the United States. In 2022, NPR featured the story.
The summer of 1961 was a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement, and that is when Black and white activists known as the Freedom Riders set out to integrate bus travel and challenge Jim Crow laws. But what happened a year later has largely been forgotten. That is when Southern segregationists fought back. Their victims were poor African Americans. From NPR's Code Switch podcast, Gabriella Emanuel of member station WGBH in Boston has the story of the reverse Freedom Rides.
Reverse freedom rides were attempts by segregationists in the southern United States in 1962 through 1963 to send African Americans from southern cities to northern and western cities by bus. They were a parody of the freedom rides organized by the Congress of Racial Equality and the Nashville Student Movement in 1961. African Americans who signed up were given free one-way bus tickets and were promised high-paying jobs and free housing. Those promises were intended to lure them in. In reality, there was no guaranteed free housing or jobs waiting for them. Some of those arriving were able to find work. Most could not. Layla Mae Williams and her children, who rode to Hyannisport, Massachusetts from Little Rock, Arkansas, soon found that out, as did the residents who met them when they arrived. But who was involved in creating this locally? The reverse rides were organized by George Singleman, member of the New Orleans Greater Citizens Council, in retaliation against Northern liberals. In early May 1962, Singleman met with local Citizens Council leaders Bill Rutledge, Executive Secretary of the Louisiana Association of Citizens Councils, Bossier City publisher Ned Touchstone, who was to head the local Freedom Bus North movement, attorney Charles L. Barnett, president of the state councils, and Shreveport Police Chief Harvey D. Teasley, not pictured. Clive Webb, a University of Sussex professor who published the only major academic article on the reverse freedom riders, said the citizens' councils attempted to cloak their racism in respectability. They held meetings in fancy downtown hotels and wore suits and ties. They could be members of the police force. They could be bankers, businessmen, and the like. But segregationists were not always so transparent about their motives. They offered ever-changing justifications for the scheme. These men masterminded an advertising effort with flyers and radio commercials to attract African Americans to accept bus tickets bought with money the councils had raised. Their ideal recruits were single mothers with many children and men who had gotten entangled in the criminal justice system. They targeted people who were either welfare recipients or prison inmates, people who were placing a burden, as they saw it, on public resources, said Webb. They wanted to make a political statement about desegregation and what they considered Northern hypocrisy.
Purposes, and if it takes 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 5 or 10 years, we will continue it till the white people up there tell those politicians we are through with this foolishness about civil rights and things that you're using for political purposes.
They articulated various rationales to make doing what they were doing respectable.
Segregationist Ned Touchstone of Louisiana said it was all social engineering.
To bring about a more equitable distribution of the colored population.
And then there's a guy, George Singleman of Louisiana. This was actually his original idea. He said it was a great American tradition.
Years ago, our forefathers put everything in their possession into covered wagons and went out across the plains. In those days, it was rugged Americanism. Now, today, for some reason or other, it's being frowned upon. I don't understand it.
According to an article in the Shreveport Journal, Singleman boasted that the Freedom Bus North movement had defeated a $50 million housing bond issue in Chicago that was expected to pass easily. But when Chicagoans were told that they might need more housing to accommodate Negroes coming up on the Freedom Bus North movement, they voted the issue down. Ned Touchstone claimed that African Americans were begging for assistance. Is it a crime to help people who come to you and say, boss man, I want to go to the North? He asked. But speaking of hypocrisy, the Louisiana Citizens Councils blasted Hyannisport for segregating the Freedom Riders who arrived there. A representative of the Citizens Council complained in the Shreveport Journal, instead of treating these colored migrants as first-class citizens, party officials and Massachusetts community leaders seem intent upon treating them as badly as the American Indian. The Kennedys and the Warrens should open their homes and hearts to these colored people instead of herding them like livestock into a military reservation in the hope that they can be removed from sight. The vision had been to send thousands north. The reality was that only a few hundred African Americans, mostly from Arkansas and Louisiana, accepted the tickets to New York, New Hampshire, New Jersey, California, Minnesota, and Idaho. The largest number, nearly 100, went to the bus stop closest to the Kennedy compound at Hyannisport on Cape Cod. So how did all this work? The September 1st, 1962 edition of The Counselor, organ of the White Citizens Council, published by Ned Touchstone, claimed the Freedom Bus North movement was very successful. The Louisiana Weekly of May 19th, 1962, on the other hand, led with a headline about riders of the Freedom Bus North project who were duped. The Montreal, Quebec Gazette for July 3rd, 1962, reported destitute Negroes from the South find North is not a paradise. An editorial published in the Minneapolis, Minnesota Star Tribune, August 24th, 1962, called out Louisiana's hypocrisy. There is a kind of speciousness to the reply of Governor Jimmy H. Davis of Louisiana to Governor Anderson about the reverse freedom riders now coming into Minnesota. The writer acknowledged that neither Louisiana nor any of its political subdivisions had sponsored the reverse freedom rides. But in a larger sense, the article pointed out, all white Americans, North and South, who have cultivated racism or who by indifference have allowed it to fester and spread are responsible. There are those who contend that the sponsors of the reverse freedom riders are completely sincere, that they really believe the Negroes will have improved opportunities in the North. Though the writer pointed out the implications of that belief make it hard to imagine people as proud of their heritage as Southerners would be willing to make such an admission.
When Alan Gilmore and his family arrived in the African American community of Trenton, New Jersey, stepped up where their white counterparts had failed. Reverend S. Howard Woodson, president of the New Jersey NAACP, pastor of the Shiloh Baptist Church, and the first African American to be elected to Trenton City Council, spearheaded arrangements to find food, housing, and clothes for the family. The family was hosted at the Jersey Hotel with meals provided. Clothes were donated by the community as the clothes they had were not suitable for the northern climate. 4 African American churches held special collections to get donations of up to $500, which was given to the family. The outpouring of support from the community helped the family land on their feet. Alan is quoted as saying, he wanted to go to work as soon as possible. I don't want to be a burden on anyone. He asked that a total be kept so he could pay everyone back once he found a job. The last news article about the event was February 13th, stating that Alan was planning to accept a job as a janitorial worker. There is no evidence that anyone from the family ever returned to Shreveport. Alan Gilmore's obituary of 1992 said he spent 30 years as a resident of Trenton and died surrounded by family. It is important to note that while the Gilmore family seemed to find their footing in New Jersey, many other families from the reverse freedom rides did not. The family was lucky, as the African American community was the one to show up with open arms, while families that were sent to predominantly white neighborhoods did not receive the same support.
In addition to Alan Gilmore and his family, other Shreveport residents became reverse freedom riders. Among them, 4 men, a woman, and 2 children who departed May 4th, 1962 for Chicago and Kansas City. James Love, 56, 329 Baker Street. Frank Hill, 43, of 528 East Dalzell Street. Luther Harris, 35, and his family, 719 Caddo Street. And Charles Gates, 33, 1109 Caddo Street. Ned Touchstone, chairman of the local Freedom Bus Committee, gave each solo traveler $5 and the Harris family $45 for spending money. The local Citizens Council did send telegrams to officials at the various destinations after the buses departed. Willie Hill, 26, and her 6 children, and Marie Adger, 21, both of 1252 Travis Street. Olive Marie Johnson, 19, of 1214 Travis Street. Winston DeSales, 31, who came to Shreveport from Marksville, and May Reno Houston, 815 Fannin Street, all were sent to Concord, New Hampshire. Reverend Hartley T. Graydon, Executive Secretary of the New Hampshire Council of Churches, accused Southern segregationists of indifference about what happens to the riders. However it is motivated, it is callously indifferent to the unfortunate victims who have become pawns in a tragic struggle, he said. Margaret Mosley, a longtime civil rights activist in Hyannis, recalled in a televised interview a few years before her death.
It was one of the most inhuman things that I have ever seen.
By spring of 1963, criticism of the controversial Southern segregationist scheme reached a crescendo even in the South, and the Citizens Council ran out of funds to continue their operation.
In mid-2022, Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis took action to send migrant asylum applicants to Washington, D.C., New York City, and other locations that take liberal views of enforcing immigration policies. Both governors spoke out against current immigration policies and sanctuary cities. Both governors' actions, notably the Martha's Vineyard's migrant crisis, were criticized as officials in the receiving states found that migrants claimed to have been deceived about what offers they were given. DeSantis' office has denied this allegation even after a class action suit by migrants he sent from Texas to Martha's Vineyard revealed a consent form they allegedly signed. These actions have been compared to the reverse freedom rides by numerous media outlets such as Fox, CNN, Democracy Now!, The Guardian, The Hill, and NPR. The explanation given by Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy in voicing support for the relocation of migrants in September 2022 echoes the rationale of Citizen Council members 6 decades earlier. In terms of making people in other states confront morality, I think it's a good idea in the long term, Cassidy said. According to a CNN report, in September 2022, DeSantis openly touted his motivations for redirecting migrants from the border as a way to maximize heartburn for Democratic leaders. He reportedly threatened to send them to President Joe Biden's home state of Delaware, among other liberal strongholds. DeSantis also echoed the hypocrisy claim made by the Citizens Council as a motivation. All those people in DC and New York were beating their chests when Trump was president, saying they were so proud to be sanctuary jurisdictions, saying how bad it was to have a secure border. The minute even a small fraction of what those border towns deal with every day is brought to their front door, they all of a sudden go berserk. It just shows you their virtue signaling is a fraud. In a piece in independent news outlet, Democracy Now!, Mwalem Peters, English and Black Studies professor at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, says the strategy of the reverse freedom rides to humiliate liberals is basically identical to what's happening now in Martha's Vineyard. While the similarities between the reverse freedom rides of the early 1960s and Operation Lone Star, or Florida's unauthorized alien transport program, have been well noted at many sources, there were some differences. Governors Abbott and DeSantis, in most cases, provided no notice of the arrival of migrants to the destination cities, while the Citizens Council at least wired mayors prior to the arrival of the buses. And the difference in scale between the programs then and now are enormous. While the Citizens Council ultimately transported about 1,000 people out of the South, Texas and Florida have transported tens of thousands to date. A January 12, 2024 press release by Greg Abbott's office announced that Texas had transported over 100,000 migrants to sanctuary cities. An article in The Hill in September 2022 compared Texas and Florida governors' transport of migrants to human trafficking. The United Nations defines human trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. Abbott's migrant busing has cost Texas $148 million so far, and Florida $11.5 million of state money. By contrast, the Citizens Council raised money for the project and used no public funds. By the time Abbott and DeSantis launched their migrant transport program, any pretense of respectability had been abandoned. Webb wrote, "The white conservatives who were behind that campaign then, the reverse freedom rides, actually underestimated the decency of many ordinary people. This small slice of hope can help the community stuck between political parties, whether African American or refugees, find a safety net on the other side of the scheme. The ultimate success or failure of these programs relies completely on the response of people who step up to help or those who choose to ignore the influx of people who desperately need help. We can learn a lot by looking at why the Reverse Freedom Rides is considered a failure and why a new version of it has sprung up to take its place. As Sidney J. Harris, an American journalist for the Chicago Daily News and the Chicago Sun-Times said, "History repeats itself, but in such cunning disguises that we never detect the resemblance until the damage is done."
Thank you.